I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Dorothy Whiston, and I'm one of the founders of Inside Out Reentry, currently serve on the board and act as a volunteer interfaith chaplain for Inside Out. To my immediate left is Rich Mathias, who is the case manager at Inside Out. And to his left is Robbie Robinson, who is the founder and executive director of Discover Hope 517 Ministries in Newton. So they will introduce themselves a little more completely as they share some of their own stories down the road a little bit. Had we known what Mitchell Jackson was going to talk about, we might have renamed this panel Revisioning, but we're calling it Healing. And I'm often pretty insistent that everything having to do with reentry have some component of looking at healing or growth or personal transformation. And very often it's said that housing and jobs are what make for successful reentry, and they are absolutely crucial to creating a stable life. But in my experience, there are kind of three phases of creating a stable life. The first is getting a job and a house, and so that's achieving stability. And most people can do that, not easily, but pretty successfully within the first several weeks, unless there is serious, active mental health or substance abuse issues going on. It's a generalization, but I think overall is true. The second phase that I describe is called describe as maintaining stability. And that is continuing to hold a job and an apartment. And for most people, that takes an awful lot of their time and energy for several months to a year, sometimes more than a year. And part of that, maintaining stability for many, many, many people coming out of prison, also means being in mental health treatment, substance abuse recovery, and something that we're just now beginning to name and address in trauma recovery. If you were here last night, you heard Beth Skinner talk about the 50-some% or 60-some% of people in our prisons who have mental health issues. It's on this resource I gave you with lots of things you can read or watch on the internet and a few stats at the back. What they haven't measured is how many people have either substantial, what are called the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences of trauma, or PTSD. And one of the things that studies are beginning to show is that for many, many people, prison itself causes PTSD. So that's a big issue. And one of the things we know about people who have significant trauma in their lives is that it's in their bodies and in their brains. And the brain kind of rewires itself in response to trauma so that it is kind of constantly in the fight, flight, or freeze response. It kind of recycles itself rather than going into the thought, decision-making, cognitive part of the brain. And so that's very hard for people to make good decisions and lead steady, stable lives if they're constantly in this state of urgency, which is a totally natural response. It's not like it's maladaptive only in the sense that it's hard to live life that way. It's adaptive in terms of surviving trauma. So doing trauma work with people, I think, is very important. And then hopefully by 18 months, Beth Skinner last night said the vast majority of people who are going to go back to prison go back within the first 18 months. People can begin to live in a phase I call sustained stability, where not every ounce of their mental, emotional, and often physical energy has to go to maintaining housing and employment and the basics of life, but they can begin, hopefully are well on their way to first of all, healing, and second of all, using their creativity. I loved his thing, every person is a special kind of an artist. Discovering more about that in themselves and developing that into their lives. So reentry to me is not so much about recidivism. I think our speaker last night, Sean Pica, said that as well. It's about creating lives that are happy and fulfilling and healthy, and letting people kind of discover who they are, the best of themselves, and become that person. So revisioning is a great way to look at that, I think. So besides looking at trauma and mental illness and substance abuse, it's also really important to look at some of the social issues like intergenerational poverty, racial inequities, gender inequities, and also the disrupted families and communities that have been caused by the criminal justice system itself, by mass incarceration. And to realize that pretty much anybody in prison today is going through a broken system. That at every level of our criminal justice system, from policing to sentencing to incarceration to release, there are serious, serious flaws. And I would say flaws at the level of kind of philosophical underpinnings. And we're beginning to see in Europe and in other places different models. I myself am with Angela Davis. I think prison, I'm an abolitionist, although not a radical one. I think improving prisons is worth doing. The European model of incarceration is totally different than ours. But I think the idea of incarceration and separating most people from their communities is something that has passed its usefulness in our culture, and that we have other effective ways to help people revision their lives and heal and do things with their lives and in their communities and in their families that are much more productive than going to prison. So I think it's important to look at the social political issues as well. We also want to touch on some of the factors that seem to help people in their healing, their revisioning. One is, of course, access to treatment, whether it's for mental illness or substance abuse, trauma recovery, and also physical health care. I actually have some good news to share. I spoke with Beth Skinner, who's the new director of the Department of Corrections, after she spoke last night. And one of the pressing concerns in my mind has been that Iowa has this horrible donut hole, which is that many, many people don't come straight from prison to the community. They go to work release first. When you're in work release in the state of Iowa, you are not on parole. You're still in the custody of the Department of Corrections, but you are not eligible for Medicaid. And the Department of Corrections will no longer provide your health care, mental or physical. So we have people who take ambulances to the emergency room because they're about to have a heart attack because they can't get their medicine. And that's not an infrequent thing. And certainly people trying to get mental health services, they're just out of luck. And people are in work release for usually several months, sometimes as much as a year, and they're not getting the kind of mental and physical health services they need because nobody will pay for it. I actually had a conversation with an employee of a nearby work release center, and I said, well, what are they supposed to do? And he said, they learn to bargain for their health care. And I was like, what? I couldn't bargain for my health care. That's just completely unrealistic. But what it means is that many of them are in a state of emergency a lot repeatedly during their first months out of incarceration. But Beth Skinner told me that it turns out that that's an administrative regulatory issue, not a statutory issue. It's true that the federal rules are that you have to be on parole at least to get Medicaid. But in Iowa, the way they've been doing it is you are assigned from an institution, a prison, to work release, and then when you complete work release, you're put on parole. Now, by just changing the rules, they are going to make it so that you are paroled to a work release assignment. So that donut hole will be closed, she thought, within a couple of months. So that's just an absolute huge achievement on her part, to notice that it's been this way for years and years and nobody has dealt with it. So congratulations to her. So treatment is one thing we need to look at. Another thing that we want to look at is spirituality and resiliency. We all have inner lives. Some of us don't pay much attention to us. Some of us are sort of obsessive about that. But that's where resiliency comes from. And in the reentry process particularly, people are going to face setbacks. And they may face traumatic setbacks. And so to develop in an intentional way an inner resilience, an inner sense of purpose and direction, which for many people comes through their spirituality, but there are also other ways. The other thing, and this is true even in addiction treatment now, a sense of belonging is crucial. Some now say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's belonging. And I don't know the professional research on that, but it's certainly crucial to the process. So whether it's reconnecting to your own family, finding a community of people with similar experiences and who accept you for who you are, which hopefully is what programs like ours are able to do, but also a sense of belonging in the wider community is very, very important. I guess the last kind of piece of that, I would say, is life skills, that a lot of people don't come out of incarceration knowing things like budgeting and even things like cooking, but they also don't necessarily have good soft skills in terms of employment. So you can get somebody a job, but if somebody doesn't have good communication skills, good skills in conflict resolution, things like that, they're probably not going to stay in that job for a real long time. So I want to say one more thing. The last component of this panel is restorative justice. And we have a system of retributive justice. The basis of what we do is adversarial. It's the state against someone. If the state wins, then retribution is the name of the game, whether it's fines or incarceration. And that also is true on a wider level, that the sense often, and certainly what we're told is the community sense, is that people want criminals punished. Well, there's now beginning to be research that particularly victims of crime and even violent crime do not want that. What they want is to heal and to know that they are safe, but also to know that the person who's hurt them is not going to hurt somebody else. And we now know that prisons breed criminality, and that someone is more likely to engage in criminal behavior after time in prison than less likely. And so this is an incredible book. It's called Until We Reckon, and it's about, and the subtitle is Violence, Mass Incarceration, and the Road to Repair. So we often think about prison reform in terms of drug crimes and property crimes, which is important, but many people are in our prisons for violent crimes, and they have huge success. This is a program called Common Justice in Brooklyn. Their website is on the resource sheet, where they divert violent criminals, people who have committed violent crimes, in restorative justice practices. So the framework of restorative justice is that anytime there is an offense committed, there are three groups of people who are affected. One certainly is the person who has been harmed, but also their immediate family and friends are very often traumatized by what's happened. Then, of course, there's the person who has caused the harm, and their family and friends are also directly impacted. And then there is the community at large, that, feeling like you're not safe, or just reading in the papers, or certainly witnessing down the block, crime is hard on people and makes communities less healthy. The idea behind restorative justice you can hear in the name, which is to restore things, to restore individuals through healing, but also to restore relationships. That it's an idea of mending rather than punishing. The other thing that restorative justice, I think, accomplishes much more than retributive justice is accountability. That in this game of the state versus so-and-so, and we're going to now lock you up, there is no real process by which somebody has to examine their life and hear from the person they hurt, how they were hurt, what the consequences were, what needs to happen for healing for that person. And in restorative justice encounters, that is a central part of it. And so people are able to hear and respond. Often, and survivors vast prefer this processing than often feel victimized again by the retributive justice system, where they don't get their questions answered, they don't feel a part of the process. For people who want to revision their lives, taking a meaningful meaningful process of accountability, and coming to terms with what they've done, how it's affected others, what it means to discover the remorse they may feel, to express that, to realize that I'm sorry is not just words but actions, and to begin to revision their lives so that they don't harm people and can make amends. So, and the other thing I think I would say is that our society, I think, has been, hopefully not mortally, but seriously wounded by the retributive justice system that we've all lived under for decades and decades, centuries. I think it's made us less merciful people, less community-minded. Actually, the woman who wrote this book talks about justice as righting a power imbalance. When an offense is committed, the scales go out of balance. But we are often pretty intent on going this way, and really what we want to find is right relationship with one another. And so she says that justice comes when accountability and mercy embrace. And mercy is not so much necessarily on the part of the survivor of crime, although very often it is, but it's on the part of the larger society, that we don't do everything that we could possibly do to someone who commits a crime. We do what we need to do to keep people safe, but then we work toward accountability and healing for all parties involved. So, and I think people, even if they've gone to prison, who have gone through a restorative justice process, have much greater tools and a sense of possibility than just kind of slogging through the retributive justice system that we subject people to today. For the most part, there are some restorative justice things going on. So I'm going to be quiet. Part of this is I had to do what we need to do to get continuing education credits. I've done it. And now we're going to tell stories and hopefully have discussion. Rich is going to tell some about his life and what he does. So, Rich.
How's everybody doing? I'm just going to give you the short version of what went on. I came to America in '69 from South Korea. I was born in Seoul, Korea, as an American citizen there, and my father was in the Vietnam War. He was getting ready to serve his third tour. He was killed a month after we got here to America. So, like I said, this is the real short version of it all. I was raised by a pretty corrupt, abusive police officer, excuse me. But so I had a pretty tumultuous childhood. It was pretty rough, but so I was introduced to alcohol and drugs when I was 11 years old. I fell in love. I really fell in love with it. It was something that took all the pain away from me. Then it was a life of being a drug addict. Then so many things of your friends being killed and taking their own lives. It was all part of my life from, like I said, from the time I was 11. I was at one time I would call myself a career criminal. It got to the point where I was selling drugs. And when I mean selling drugs, I mean all drugs, anything that I could get my hands on. At first, it was just to pay for the drugs that I was using. And then it just multiplied from then. I got married to this girl. The only thing that we had in common was drugs, and that's what we did. So, how long that really lasted. It's about 4 years of a pretty failed marriage and 2 children, which, I'll definitely never take back the time that I spent with her because she did give me 2 beautiful sons. At one point, after quite a few failed relationships and a couple arrests in my past, I just told myself, that I was going to be the best drug dealer that I could ever be. So I went big after that. So I started selling loads of cocaine, methamphetamine, LSD, psilocybin cubensis mushrooms, everything that I could get my hands on, which in turn made me actually stop using drugs, except for like marijuana. Marijuana was a big thing for me. I was introduced to alcohol and marijuana with each other, at 11, so it became big for me. And then I met Bonnie. I'll call her Bonnie because she was definitely Bonnie to my Clyde. We got together and we went really hard, I was selling several pounds of marijuana daily, and my problem was I didn't like to go get it somewhere else, so I thought, wow, dude, you should really grow this stuff. But it seemed like everyone was growing marijuana, so I had to grow some type of specialty strain of marijuana. So I started traveling all over the country, eventually all over the world, Canada, Amsterdam, Madrid, just anywhere that I could to find these specialty marijuanas. And I was smuggling strains back into the United States. Like I said, I'll make this pretty short. There's a lot more to what went on. So on May 10th of 2011, the police knocked on my door. They didn't bust down the door or anything. They just knocked. I opened the door and big old whiff of marijuana smoke went into his face, and he's like, "That's the first thing that I thought I was going to smell." That's exactly what he said to me, and he came in and they ransacked through my house, found several pounds of marijuana, scales and all that stuff that goes with it, hashish, hash oil, everything that you could ever imagine was there. They also found 277 marijuana plants, 6 different strains that I got from the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, and I was arrested. They arrested me with 3 felonies and an aggravated misdemeanor. That aggravated misdemeanor was probably the hardest thing. They arrested me for child endangerment because my newly 3-year-old child was present at the house when they came to raid my house, which is pretty tough. So I fought the case. I would have won. But one day before my motion to suppress evidence hearing on the state level, the DEA knocked on my door. Yeah, I don't know why them guys didn't bust it down, but they didn't either. They knew I was pretty nonviolent. I didn't have any weapons or anything. I was just a dude that sold marijuana and did drugs, So they turned my state case into a federal case. From there, I got pretty pissed off. Just before that too, I was gonna beat everything. It was just gonna make me a more of a super criminal, Then they put me in the hole. I had to do 10 months in jail waiting for the whole federal process to go through, and they locked me down for 23 hours a day. I got out sometimes an hour a day. That's like living in your bathroom. That's exactly what it was. People ask me, what was it like? And I go, smelled like shit. Because that's what it was. It's pretty hard. That was the hardest time. Jail time's the hardest time. So eventually, you know, going through this, I'm just telling myself, you're just going to be this better super criminal when you get out. You're going to learn a new trade. You're going to make all these connections, and you're going to bring in tons of, you know, hard narcotics to Iowa. That's what I was going to do. Eventually, I was convicted of not the 277 marijuana plants, but 877 marijuana plants. They attached what they call ghost dope, 600 marijuana plants to my sentence. And then I was sent to Leavenworth. First, I had to go through the Correctional Corporation of America, privatized jails and prisons before I could get there. In Leavenworth, I was like, man, this is it. I'm just going to fake it to make it. I'm going to do every program they could, try to get out of here as early as I could, you know. But as you know, you do 85% of your time when you're federally arrested. And I had the minimum mandatory sentence that you all spoke of earlier. So, you know, I was making the connections with the Mexican prison gangs. I was doing everything that I was wanting to do to become this super criminal. And then it was like 2 weeks before Christmas in 2012. I called home, and I'd been calling home for like a week, and Bonnie hadn't been answering the phone. And I was wondering what was going on, you know. Well, she told me that she was leaving our marriage. And I was like, wow, just to be in prison and, you know, my wife's gonna, you know, split on me and everything. It was pretty hard. I thought it was gonna be really the hardest thing that I'd ever gone through, you know. But you know what it also did? It made me want to become a super criminal even more. You know, I was gonna get all this money, I was gonna get out, and Bonnie was gonna come back, and we were gonna go back to our life of crime and everything, which never happened. And that wasn't the hardest thing that I ever went through while I was in prison. Sorry. My mom came and visited me once while I was down in Leavenworth. I told her not to come back. I said I only had 18 months left. You know, just don't come back and feed the system. I didn't want her to feed the system. That was the last time I talked to her. Yeah. 4 months before I got out, she was killed. I'm sorry. That's what changed me. No more super criminal. No more going to sell drugs or anything. I had to be the person that she wanted me to be. I guess that's where the healing started, this healing that we talk about. And I didn't even really know what that healing meant to me. Thanks. And I found that healing after, when I got out of prison. I wasn't faking it to make it anymore. I was just gonna really make it. I was gonna be someone that my mom would have been proud of. So, oh man, I looked for jobs like you wouldn't believe. I faced all those barriers that you would ever think of when you came out of prison. Not only that, but being a man of color too wasn't helping me at all, especially in Iowa City. But I don't mean that bad on Iowa City or Johnson County or anything, but it was tough. So about after 35 interviews, I found this program called the Parent Partner Program. They're mentoring fathers. You know, I was going to be mentoring fathers that had their children taken away by DHS. When I went in there to apply for the job, this is what I used to say when I was applying for jobs. And I got to tell you, I got a federal felony. That's the first thing that I would say in an interview. Well, her name was Jolene. She goes, well, what kind of felony? I go, well, I was, arrested for growing a lot of marijuana and distribution. And she goes, oh, don't worry about that. I was like, what? It's like, man, it almost floored me. It was like, wow. And then I go, well, I got to tell you, I'm on the child abuse registry because my kid was in the house. She goes, well, you're going to need that for this job. I was like, what? She goes, yeah, you had to have been there, done that to be able to mentor and help these fathers get their children back or to help them lose them. one way or another, we were there for them. So I did that for about 3.5 years, you know, and I'm very, very happy that I did. I got to really see the inside and out of people that are coming out of prisons, people that are lost their kids, drug addiction like crazy, the heroin and meth epidemics, you know. I was able to help a few people, you know, just from where I had come from. And then this one psychologist told me, you know, parent partners is a stepping stone. And I go, really? I never looked at it like that. I thought this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So I just went for it, and I applied for a job at the Abbey Center in Cedar Rapids, and I couldn't believe it. I got it. And they knew about my background and everything. And then I had to convince DHS that I was a good person now, you know. I was going to be a productive member of society. It only took them an hour to call back and said that I was approved. Yeah, I showed them all the things that I had done while I was in prison and while I was outside of prison, you know, so they approved me. And then one day, I seen it, the ad for Inside Out Reentry Community. And I had heard about the I don't really want to call it a program because we're a community of people, you know, that are just trying to help other people. But I knew I had to be a part of it, you know, just one way or another. I just had to be a part of it, so I applied. That's when I met Michelle and Jamie, you know. It's a pretty amazing feeling and, you know, amazing moment, you know. But that's who I am today. Just someone trying to help other people that just got out of prison. Yeah, maybe I'll write a book about it later on too. But yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
All right, man. I don't know if I can top that. That was awesome. That was a good story. So, really, that's your life. That's really his life. And so I'm Robbie Robinson, and I'm very vocal, and I'm loud, and I'm very charismatic. And I would tell you today I love people, but before I hated y'all. So I just hated people. And so, but I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Michelle, for inviting me. Thanks, Inside Out, for what you're doing. It resonates with my heart because of what I get to do and what my passion is and what I love to do. So I'll be honest with you. My thanks is I want to first of all thank Jesus, man. I love the Lord. I'm sold out because it's the center of my heart. It's my core. It's what truly had changed who I am. And so I know a lot of times I look at him and I think like I remember the moments in my life where I was wondering if I would ever get past the stage where people would just see me as a individual who was incarcerated. Right? Would the community or the world ever see me as who God has originally created me to be? A father, a husband, a productive citizen, a man of God, right? A leader, an entrepreneur. So I wonder if people would ever see me as that person again, because what the world see us as, you think about criminal justice and reform, is I'm always going to be a second-class citizen, right? Really, I don't have a voice in the world standpoint. But so it's good to be on this side of the table that I can advocate to have a voice for individuals who's been in our shoes, men and women both. So yeah, so I was formerly incarcerated, just so you didn't know, just because this is the culture we're in right now. And so I've been out of prison now 15 years. Man, God has been good to me. I served about 5 years. I was facing a 70-year sentence for drugs. Yeah, I was an addict and got 70 years. I know, right? Crazy. I had a middle mandatory, and so I fought my case a lot while I was inside. And so just really to get to the place where I'm at today, I have to go there, because it was what happened while I was incarcerated that really changed the course of my life and to put me where I'm at today. And so I can't really share my story if I don't share that part of it, because what happened for me tremendously is I was a 2-time felon. My first time I went to prison for pistol whooping a guy. I was a gang member and got in a fight. The culture of life is I would like to blame prison for who I was. But to be honest with you, I was who I was because of the trauma that I went through as a kid. right? So the mental abuse, the sexual abuse, the verbal abuse, the physical abuse. My mom was a very alcoholic, don't know who my real dad is. So all those things that happened to me when I was a kid really what created this dysfunctional behavior that I exposed, right? So externally, I was a madman because internally I was dying, right? And so no one really ministered to that part of my heart. So I didn't know how to deal with that pain or that hurt, so I covered it up. So I buried it. And so I became a menace to society. So I became this image that the people in the community see me as, because really what was happening, they never asked me, Robbie, really what's going on? What's really going on in your life? And so what happened is I ended up in prison. And so in prison, I learned a lot of different things for sure. I grew up in there. I grew up in that system, juvenile system, boot camp, Eldora State Training School twice, Woodwork boot camp, and eventually I was in prison twice. And so I spent from age 14 to 25 locked up. And so I didn't know how to live, but how to be locked up. So that was my whole culture. That was my mentality. So I didn't know how to be a productive citizen if you wanted me to be. I never even filled out a job application. Right? What is a job application? Like, I didn't know any of those things before I got out of prison. And so in prison, I had an opportunity to go through this program. At the time, it was called Interchange Freedom Initiative for Prison Fellowship, PF Academy. I got the chance to go to that program while I was in prison. And what that program was a faith-based program that really taught these core values about being rehabilitated while in prison, right? So the Pell Grant was banned before I got there, so I didn't get the higher education. I didn't get none of that, man. So job readiness, all the things that you assume that the prison system would equip you to do to get out, to actually not come back, that's not true. Because reality is it functioned off funding. So if everyone was rehabilitated and never go back to prison, it wouldn't be no money, right? They wouldn't make any money. So something has to happen. So even low crime rates to violent crimes, I mean, it's a system, it's a process, it's a revolving door. So I was on a lifetime installment plan. I really was. And so one day in the prison, a guy who was 40 years old bet me 10 tokens that I wouldn't get my GED because I had time for school. I didn't have a family that was educated that even encouraged me to go to school, right? So I started selling dope when I was making $20,000 a week selling dope. Why would I go to school? Just no way. I'm balling out of control. So I remember that guy bet me 10 tokens because I was competitive. And so I wanted to win those 10 tokens. He said, I bet you can't get your GED in 2 weeks. Oh, before it snows, he said, I got my GED in 2 weeks. I actually went over to the school, and the teacher told me I needed 3 credits to graduate, to get my diploma. And I said, well, how long would it take me to get those 3 credits? He said, I got to go through the whole school system, right, the whole little year. I'm like, I ain't got time for that. I ain't got time for that. Like, what's next? What's the next thing I can do? Like, I'm going to win this bad. Like, I'm not going to school for 6 months, you crazy lady. I'm going to discharge my sentence for once. I really don't want to do school anyways. I just want to get home. And so I got my GED, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up. I was on the top bunk. I woke up. I jumped off my bunk and just started yelling, right? My cellie gets up like, dude, what's going on? It's like, dude, I got my GED. Like, I did that. I'd accomplished something for the first time in my life. For the first time in my life, I accomplished something. I had my little cap. I had my diploma. I did that. That was me. I didn't catch it in the moment when I went through the whole ceremony or anything, but that night, that morning, I got it. And that was just one part in prison that happened. But what really changed my life in prison is when my son, he was 5 years old. And so my son, he was 5. His brother was 18 months. His mom, her boyfriend, my sister and their boyfriend was at the club. They was clubbing. They come home 2 o'clock in the morning, drunk and high. One of them decided to cook. And so then they fell asleep. Grease caught on fire. House goes up in flames. Boys hid in a closet and died. So smoke ventilation. They couldn't find the boys. His mom and my sister-in-law jumped out the window screaming for help, left the kids in the bedroom. And so they hit my daughter at the time, wasn't there. And I really didn't know my daughter because she was just little when I left. And so, but that was the moment I went to a massive state of depression and tried to commit suicide while I was in prison. This all happened while I was in prison, my second time in prison. I was on my 5-year sentence. And I remember having an opportunity to go to my son's funeral and to speak at my son's funeral. And the first time I ever spoke publicly. But I remember seeing my mom out there, and I hated my mom to my core. Hated her. because she took everything from me. She took my safety. And everything that she did to me and allowed to happen to me, had no heart for her. And so I remember seeing my mom sitting out there, and I've seen my son's mom and my sister. And in that moment, I realized, you talk about healing, I realized in that moment that I needed to forgive them. Even though I didn't know how, but I knew I needed to forgive them. And I remember telling them that I did. I said, I forgive you for what happened. I should have been home. I should have been a man. I chose the lifestyle and the culture lifestyle that I was doing. I chose that. No one else did. I chose that. I chose that as my excuse because of what happened to me. And this is a part of my discipline. And so I asked them for forgiveness. And I would tell you, my life has never been the same since then. And so I got this massive fire for the Lord after that, where I realized that prison wasn't my life. Prison wasn't my life. And I had a daughter out there, and I told myself I was going to be a father to my daughter no matter what the barriers was going to be. I was going to do that. And so at the end of my 5 years, when I got out, man, I became this massive advocate to become a father. And I remember my daughter's mom wasn't believing that, though. She wasn't having nothing to do with it. She's like, nope, you're the same old person. It's only going to be a matter of time, right? You're crazy. You're not going to be part of your daughter's life. And I remember saying, yes, I am. I'm going to be a part of my daughter's life. So when I was going through the Prison Fellowship Academy, I ended up going through Reentry. And so Reentry helped me to get connected to the community, right? So when I got connected to the community, I was in Newton Correctional Facility, the minimum maximum down the hill there, and I got a private sector job. I was working at Rock Communications in a printing company. Hated that job, but I was there, right? And so I did. I mean, I'm not very tall, right? And they had these massive paper rolls that I had to hang all the time. So I was waiting on a moment for one to fall on me. And I would never escape from it. And so, but when I got out, I did such a great job working there. When I was released, I was able to keep that job. And so, and I kept that job. And I had this mentality like, I'm not going back to prison. I'm a 2-time felon. Like, you don't even know my name in prison. I was inmate 1168362B. That was my number, right? That was my state number. I wasn't Robbie Robinson. I was a state number. And so I was like, I'm determined. I was determined to be different. And so, and my faith was playing a major part of that, because God had begun to tell me that I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't that person anymore. So when I got out of prison, I knew I was going to have to face the whole community. I knew I was going to have to face the world and what the world thought about me, what they believed about me. And so I had these strikes against me, right? For one, I was black. I was black. Culturally, I was black, right? 2, I was a 2-time felon. I was 2-time felon. 3, I was uneducated. So none of those things I got any type of help with in prison. So when I got out of prison, as a man, as a young man, I had to figure out how to deal with these barriers to become successful, or to create sustainability, to create restoration, right, in my life. And so I began that journey, and I got out. So I got connected with some mentors. I had a great support system. I got out in 2005, March of 2005. So I've been out 15 years. March will be 15 years. And so I had, my discharge date was 2012, but I got paroled to discharge in 2007. Actually, so I discharged 5 years early. My PO was like, there's no reason I'm gonna waste my time on you. You're doing super good. And so I had a goal when I got out. I had my own 5-year plan. I said by the time I was 30, I wanted to have custody of my daughter. I wanted to buy a house, and I wanted to be off paper. That was my plan. 2 years, I completed all that. 2 years. And so, yeah, I was hungry, man, because I wanted to be different. And so my heart is to tell you this, is that the battle is real for any individual who is incarcerated getting out. It's real. But what I've learned in the ministry I could do, Discover Hope 517 Ministry, is a recovery community organization. So when I founded that ministry, my heart was to be able to build a bridge for individuals who was coming out of any form of substance abuse addiction or mental health disorder. Anyone from prison to jail who was coming out, how can I help them connect to the community in a healthy way? Right? Because it's easy for me to say, hey, man, I'm going to try to build partnerships with employers to get you jobs. But what is a job going to do for an individual who never in their life managed money? I mean, the dope man's going to get their money. And so I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. But also, what does it help to help an individual realize they need to be different, but don't help eliminate the noise? So you need to have both. You need to have this merge of both. So I created this saying called stay in your lane, right? So I love what Inside Out do. So I would never enter into their lane, but I would take what I get to do and say, how can we partner? How can we together change a culture, change a system? And so what Discover Hope 517 Ministry get to do is we get to help individuals make that transition. And so we have a Fresh Start program. It's a lot of stuff we do. And so you have to really get connected to us to see just the ins and outs. We do a lot what Inside Out talk about doing. So we really want to try to help make partnerships. Our biggest thing is we're faith-based. So we really focus on healing. So we have 3 things. We talk about redemption. Redemption is really about, I would say, it's about understanding who you are spiritually, right? I want to know who Jesus is, and that's my heart. But what happens is when I get into a place of understanding who I am as a person, I identify what my purpose is. Hope. So we talk about redemption. How do we help them get to a place where they understand that there's a purpose for their existence and that they're no longer defined by who they used to be? That they can become a new person. And the second thing we talk about is healing. We created a process of just unique healing. How do we help them deal with the trauma in their lives so they actually can receive the blessing that they're searching for? So you talk about a man being restored to his kids. You talk about a mother being restored to their kids. And so the greatest thing I get to do when I go into a courtroom with these moms and I listen to the judge say, hey, you know what? For this last year, you've been doing exceptionally well. I'm going to give you full custody of your kids back. And seeing them being restored to their kids, seeing them walking with their kids, seeing families. You know, a part of what we get to do, I can be selfish and say my life has changed, but what I've been able to bless to do is build a new legacy. So when I got to watch my daughter Diamond, she's 19. So I've been married to Emily, my wife, beautiful wife Emily. She's white. She's got red hair and freckles, green eyes, sexy as all outdoors, right? That's my boo. And so, I love her to death. We've been married for 8 years, and so together 9 years, and I have 6 kids. You know, so yeah, we do. And so mine's, hers, and ours. And so my daughter, well, her just turned 13 yesterday. 13 going on 30, I know. And so we have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and 20-month-old Maya. She's my baby Maya. She's my 20-month-old. And so I can't have no more kids now. She told me I had to get fixed. But so we got 6 kids. And so it's just an amazing opportunity that I get to create a new culture, new legacy, and break generational curses in my family's life. So the greatest accomplishment I have today, brother, is that the fact that my kids will never, ever have to go through what I went through. Ever. My kids will grow up never knowing that experience of daddy's life because I have changed the culture of my family and created a new legacy. That's the heart of what we're doing every day. If we want to create an environment where people who's coming out of prison, coming out of jails, can create a new legacy for their lives. And so, well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And now it's your turn. Time for questions and answers before this session ends.
I actually would have so much to say, but I just want to thank you for today and kind of a comment you made, Robbie, about leaving a legacy. I did 9 years. They allowed me to go back into the Oakdale prison, and I volunteer there with the lab program and with the choir. And what we talk about is finishing well. You know, I was in prison, and I realized I spent my 40th birthday in a lockdown unit at Oakdale, and I realized I did not, when I left, I did not want to be the same man as when I walked in. And over the last, I've been out for 7 years and have been able to assist other returning citizens to finish well. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's awesome.
Well, that was certainly a great panel, and I appreciate everything all three of you had to say. It was wonderful to sit there and listen to these stories. So you mentioned there were three people that were impacted by criminal activity. It'd be the criminal, the victim, and then the people who have to live in society afterwards. And I think there's a fourth for me anyway, because I don't know very many people that fit into those three categories. But I have to pay taxes. I have to pay a lot of money. When I look at my tax bill every year from the state, the part that I really question is like, what am I getting for my money on the criminal justice quote unquote system? But you guys, you turned your life around, and I just would like to know, like, how much do I have to pay for that? I mean, it's $35,000 a year minimum. And so, like, I'm looking at you, you're like $150,000 turnaround, I think, right? And how long were you in for?
Yeah.
Well, I also did the federal drug treatment program, so you're probably looking at about $450.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
It's up there.
I feel better all over. And how much did I have to pay for you?
Yeah, probably around that same thing. But to get to your point though, I like that question. But you got to think about it this way. If you look at it this way, just give you perspective, real quick perspective. Yeah. So you can think about how much money you spent on an individual like us, or you can begin to see that the money that you did spend on an individual like us who are being returning citizens, whose lives are being changed and becoming productive citizens and making a difference in communities again, is money well spent, right? The issue comes when we waste money. When we are wasting money. So the restorative justice standpoint is really about how do we spend your money well, right? So how do we create higher education? How we educate our prisoners? Because higher education in prison works both ways. For one, it works great for the individual in prisons because they get educated. If they get educated, they accomplish something. If they accomplish something, that encourages them, that inspires them that they're not just an animal. They are human again, right? So our tax dollars inspires individuals to be human beings again. And then our tax dollar also helps get them opportunity once they are released from prison. When they become into our communities, I didn't get higher education in prison, so I had to fight hard. So your tax dollar, I agree with you. I pay taxes right now. I pay a lot of taxes. I make a lot of money too, just like everyone else, right? I'm paying taxes, and my brother is still in Fort Dodge Correctional Facility right now. He in prison. I'm paying for that. Right? So you was paying for me, but now I'm paying for someone else that's in prison. So it works as a holistic standpoint because, see, we have to understand what battle we really want to fight. That's the heart. So I when I see someone like you, I'm like, hey, let's choose the correct battle to fight because it's always going to be in the political realm. Our tax dollars is going to go towards things that we don't want to go towards. But if we can fight on the side of saying, hey, what can we truly do to help individuals like Rich, like Robbie, who are incarcerated, to receive the things that they need to be successful when they come out? So not to say, hey, Robbie, here's a $100 gate fee, and go out there and be a productive, positive citizen.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear. I'm more than willing to pay taxes for things that work.
That's right.
I just don't like paying them for things that don't work.
So yeah, they didn't give me any gate money, but I should tell you that the majority of people that are in prison right now is because of drugs.
Yep.
The majority of people that are in prison is because of drugs. They did a study in Portugal, right? They asked these scientists, what can we do about the heroin epidemic there? 1% of the whole population was addicted to heroin. There's people dying of HIV and AIDS, right? These scientists came back and they said, legalize drugs, decriminalize them. But not only do that, take the money that you're spending to put them in prison and actually get some help to these people. These people could come out of the closets and say, hey, I'm addicted to drugs, I need help. So that's what they did. Like Dorothy had said, the opposite of addiction is connections, and that's what they did. They help people, like, for example, a mechanic needs a job and he's addicted to drugs, right? Instead of putting him in jail and prisons, they went to a mechanic shop and said, hey, hire this guy and we'll pay half his wages for a year. You know, they created all these programs for these people. Now, overdose went down by 50%. That's huge. HIV transmitted IV drugs and everything went down in Portugal. And this is a study they did in 2005. And why are we only hearing about it now here in America? Is because that revolving door, people losing their jobs because of drug addiction.
There's also been a pilot, I don't know if it's how scientific a study, but one approach people are considering is that rather than incarceration, doing extensive treatment, which does often take people out of the housing market and even the job market, so they need support, and that it's cheaper to give people coming out of treatment a basic income for the first year than it is to incarcerate people. And so, I mean, there are just so many possible approaches that are better than us wasting money, and not only wasting money, but using money in punitive ways. I mean, we're not very conscious of that day to day, that we're paying taxes to further destroy people's lives. But we are.
Well, and Dorothy, you mentioned that there's European countries that have figured this out and are doing it very well, and we could certainly model after a number of them. My question is prevention. I listened to what you were talking about in terms of sexual abuse, child abuse, physical abuse, neglect, all of those things that as a child you both experienced and how that impacted you throughout your lives. And so I look at early childhood education as one of the keys in that, but I'm also curious about, from your perspective, what do you see as good prevention? You stopped the cycle by what you're doing with your own children right now in terms of they aren't going to go to prison because of what you've learned and you preventing that. But what else can we be doing that would be a part of that prevention recipe?
I think it's just education, right? We need to educate them. So I used to go and speak at the DARE program all the time, right? They'll call me in and say, hey, Robbie, you want to come speak? I said, you sure you want me to come speak at the DARE program? Like, because I'm really probably going to talk more to the parents than the kids, right? And so because you want to educate your school. I speak it to the high schools. And it was interesting because I couldn't go into the schools, right, because of my criminal background. So I had to fight the school superintendent in Newton, right? I was this massive guy. I was the annoying guy that knocked on the door all the time. I was that guy, like, I'm not settling for this. My son's in 3-year-old preschool, and you're going to tell me that I can't come to his Halloween party because of some crimes I committed 20 years ago? And I've been out of prison now for 12 years, and I'm a productive citizen. Like, I'm a leader in the community, right? And you still going to tell me because of my crime that I can't come into the school? And so, and I have my voting rights back. Branch that gave me my rights back to vote, all those rights, right? And so I actually sent another letter to the governor's office, and they sent me a letter back in a week just stating again that I had all my rights in store. And then I went to the school superintendent, all this. Needless to say that they allowed me to come into the school, but not only did they allow me to come to school, but they gave me an opportunity to go and speak into our schools. You talk about prevention and just really talking to the teachers too, how to come in and advocate for what the issues of drugs and alcohol, what that looks like from abuse, trauma. But one of the things I found out in the schools is this: teachers and counselors and guidance counselors in schools are mandatory reporters. They're mandatory reporters. Students not going to come and tell them about what's going on at home. If they come and tell them about what's going on at home, they got to report that, and what happens is they get removed from their house. The kids don't want to be removed from the house. They just want mom and dad stop beating them. So they don't have a safe place to talk about those things. So what I've been talking to in our school superintendent meetings, our coalition meeting, is like, how do we create a safe place for them to talk about those things where it doesn't remove them from their homes?
I'll share a real quick story about something I heard on NPR, which is a psychiatrist in Zambia, I think, where obviously there aren't a lot of psychiatrists, and a client of his committed suicide before they could reconnect after the client got out of the hospital, and he thought, there's no way we can get people to come to us to prevent suicide and to really offer effective treatment. So he started a program called the Grandmother Project, because there are grandmothers in every community and they're often available. And he got these benches called friendship benches, and he gave grandmothers who volunteered for this thing 1 month of training in cognitive behavioral therapy. And they are they are swamped. And they first kind of put these benches out of the way, but they actually have found that having them sort of downtown, and I mean, it's little villages mostly, but right out in the open, people come and they want to talk and they want to heal their lives. And with minimal training and availability, they have done one study where their intervention rate with people with significant mental illness and substance abuse problems is better than the professionals. So, there are just so many options as long as we make healing a priority for all of us, whether we're coming out of prison or living our lives. I think we have time for one more.
Now, the two of you have mentioned when you were telling your stories that it was some event that really kind of made you have this desire to want to turn your life around. As an ally, is there anything that we can do to help lead people who are struggling with that to see that desire, or would the best thing for us be to just be there and be open and loving for when they do experience that moment for themselves, and be there to support them as they begin their journey up again?
I know one thing not to do. Don't disconnect from them. They're in a junction of their life that needs you the most right at that moment. Don't disconnect from them, because studies show it, and they've done many studies. One of them was called the Vietnam War, right? You disconnect from the people that love you, it's going to make you want to go do it awful more.
Yep, and I think also, like you said, just meet them where they're at. So we have that good saying too, meet a person where they're at, right? And so no judgment, just meet them where they're at. But also I think it's really important to be connected to what's going on in your community, right? And so what are the agencies in your community that you can connect them to that you know that is effective? I mean, I have a saying like stay in your lane, but also know agencies that we don't partner with, because I know that we're going to end up with the individuals back at us. And it's just being honest, because it's a money pit for most people. And so it's like, who are the people in your community that truly you see inside out, right? You say, like, we're seeing a difference there. So let's get them connected to people that's going to walk with them. It's all about building a support system around people.
So I think my answer to that would be see the positive and accentuate the positive in the person and let them know that you see possibilities in them, but also to educate them about the effects of trauma, for example. I think a lot of people who grew up with lots of trauma in their early life have no idea that that's still what's driving their lives. So to just say to people, you're smart, you're capable, you've got a wonderful heart, you can do whatever it is you want to do. And I see you stuck in this kind of impulsive decision-making pattern. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you've had a life filled with trauma, and there are ways to work with that, because most people don't know that. They just don't know that about themselves. They think it's because they're a bad person or something. So thank you all for joining in our conversation.
Thank you.